Hey, what's going on, guys? Rum Gaming here, back to another video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Retribution Paladin Mythic Plus Guide for patch 11.1. I'm going to leave a link in the description of the video if you guys want to follow along with us. Just open the description, open the link, and it'll take you right here and you kind of follow along with us. So jumping right into it, going into the pros and cons, let's talk about some of the pros of Retribution Paladin. So one of the things really nice about Retribution Paladin is they have really short cooldowns. So we have our Wake of Ashes, which is on a 30-second cooldown, and then we also have our Radiant Glory, which has a chance to proc our Avenging Wrath. That's going to be based on the holy power that we spend. And then not only that, our Wake of Ashes will actually proc our Avenging Wrath for us. So really nice. You have a ton of low timed cooldowns. I'm not sure the best way to word that. Low cooldowns. Makes them great for Mythic Plus because every pool that you go into, they do have tools available to them. Makes them great for Mythic Plus because every pool that you do go into, you will have your cooldowns up. We also have a really good utility, and historically, I feel like Paladins underutilize their utility. Blessing of Protection and Blessing of Freedom are going to be the two main ones that come to mind, and it's kind of difficult to know when to use these. You kind of have to know the encounter beforehand. Is also something you do not want to drop in the tank, right? Because they will drop threat. A good use case for this spell, just thinking at the very end of Sacred Flame, where all the mobs kind of come up and they can't be aggroed and they kind of fixate on a specific target, you can Blessing of Protection somebody and essentially negate all the damage that's going to happen to them. So a lot of times it's really good to put that on a healer who's kind of having to be stationary to pump heals during that phase. Another good time to use it is going to be in Motherload. You have those couple mobs that are with the boss and they will fixate on a random DPS player. I believe it's always a ranged DPS player. Could be wrong on that, but that's what it feels like every time I run it. So somebody does end up getting hit and they get the bleed effect on them, you can use Blessing of Protection on them, as Blessing of Protection will remove that bleed effect. We also have spells like Blessing of Freedom. Great place to use this is going to be something like on the Trash in Cinderbrew. We have the trash mobs that will slow us. There'll be a circle effect on the ground. You're slowed, and you can Blessing of Freedom yourself out of that effect to dodge the AoE ground damage. I mean, there's tons of different use cases for these two spells. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I would highly recommend to join the Ret Paladin Discord. I'm sure that there is a list on there somewhere that highlights all the best use cases of these two spells. We also have pretty good interrupts as well. So we have our Hammer of Justice, which is a stun, so this can't be used on all mobs. So we have that on top of our Rebuke, which I did not list here. But I think overall Ret Paladin has pretty decent mob control. Not the best in the game, but pretty good. Another thing that I really like about Ret Paladin is they're very straightforward and they are very beginner friendly. They have very, very short cooldowns, which means if you accidentally use one at a bad time, it should be up within, 30 seconds to a minute. There's not much ramp with this spec either. There's not a ton of things that you're really tracking, which is really nice. It's just you press the buttons with Holy Power and it does a whole bunch of damage. And that's probably why Ret Paladin is the most played DPS spec in the game right now. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it's been that way ever since the big Ret Paladin rework. And the final pro is they have really good off healing, which is one of the main reasons that I like to bring Ret Paladins in my group. They have a great damage profile and they have really good self-sustain. There's not much more you can really ask for in a DPS spec. Good off healing, good survivability, good consistent damage, and they also bring a major utility like Battle Res. Now, some of the cons of playing Ret Paladin is you do lack single target DPS, and this does become more of a problem in higher keys where you typically have like a couple mobs that you're really trying to focus and funnel down. This is also where you really start to struggle against boss encounters, boss timers. Because with most things in Mythic Plus, you can always just pull bigger to make up for lack of DPS, but on bosses, that's kind of hard to do. You kind of just got to take the one boss at a time. If you got a lot of specs in your comp that lacks single target, it's just going to take a really long time to do those bosses and break the key. So your role as Ret Paladin is not bosses, it's going to be the trash and nuking them down. And then another con is you do compete with other Paladin specs. They bring the same utility as you do, and it's really hard to compete sometimes with Prop Paladin when they are as strong as they've been. I don't believe that they're the meta tank right now, but they are, if they're not the best, they're the second best. And I believe that is the case right now with them being behind Vengeance. So really not a huge con. If you look at the pros far outweigh the cons. I think Ret Paladin is probably one of the best DPS specs, especially if you're pugging to bring into your comp. All right, moving on to talents. We see we have the talent calculator here. We got the import string. Got a little screenshot here as well. These are taken from Raider.io, so I took an aggregate of some of the top players and tried to find all the consistent talents that they're all collectively running and put them into a tree. This seems to be the most agreed upon tree. This is one of the reasons I don't take my talents from Wowhead specifically, because Wowhead a lot of the times is outdated. If you do come into the top 5 Retribution Paladins right now, you can see that none of them are running Searing Light. But if you go into Wowhead, it will say to run Searing Light, and here are the top 5 Ret Paladin trees. You see that none of them are running Searing Light at all. So this appears to be the most agreed upon tree. So that's what we're going to stick with for this specific guide. Again, we have the talent calculator if you want to open it and just kind of go in here and read through some of these talents. We'll probably open this throughout the guide to kind of explain the synergy between things, especially once we get into this next section that we're going to talk about now, and that is the rotation. All right, so the first cooldown we're going to talk about in single target is going to be Divine Hammer. We're also using that in AoE. If you're not familiar with what this talent is, basically you will use it, and the more holy power that you spend while it's active, you will be able to increase the duration on it by half a second for each holy power spent. Now, if you do see here, it deals reduced damage beyond 8 targets, and that can be kind of the issue with bringing Ret Paladin into really high keys if you're pushing like insanely high. A lot of times they're pulling like 3 to 4 packs at a time. Ret Paladin can have issues keeping up with some other specs in AoE if you're pulling that much trash, because you can see it here with Divine Hammer, and you can also see this on Divine Storm, deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. Just something to kind of keep in mind there. I know we're talking about single target, but just keep that in mind when we talk about AoE over here. So ideally, you want to use this at 5 holy power so that you can immediately use that holy power to extend its duration. Let's go ahead and take a look here at Final Reckoning. So there's going to be something else that you want to pop at the start of your pool, because they're going to take more damage from your holy spells while this is on them. You can see in the tooltip here that it says Divine Auxiliary generates 3 holy power. We're not running that in this specific talent build. So you'll want to use this when you have as much holy power, very similar to Divine Hammer. That way you can funnel everything into one big burst window. So you'll Divine Hammer into a Final Reckoning, and then you want to spend your holy power. Now from here in single target, you'll want to press your Divine Storm if you get an Empyrean power proc, right? This is going to make our Divine Storm free and do additional damage. So if we look at our talent tree here over on the right hand side, you can see that we are running Empyrean power. So if you do get that proc, just make sure that you are spending it. Very important to spend it early in your rotation, right? Because if it procs again, you have a higher chance to proc it again the more times that you cast it instantly, essentially. And then from here, we can finally get into actually spending that holy power through our final verdict. So Ret Paladin, if you're new to it, they work off a builder-spender system. So Final Verdict is going to be a spender, and then Blade of Justice is going to be our builder. So you can see at the bottom of the tooltip here, generates 1 holy power, and this works in synergy with our Expurgation. So if you're not sure what Expurgation is at the top of our tree here. Your Blade of Justice causes the target to burn for X amount of damage over 9 seconds. So the reason it is so high in our priority list here is you want to make sure you always have Expurgation active on the target. If you don't, that's when Blade of Justice comes into play. If Expurgation is active on the target, it jumps all the way down here to step 11. It becomes less of a priority. So just something to kind of watch out for there. Then from here, we have other big cooldowns. We have like our Wake of Ashes. We have our Divine Toll. You can see here 30-second cooldown, a 1-minute cooldown. So Wake of Ashes is also going to apply another burn effect called Truce Wake. And this will also generate us 3 holy power. So make sure that you are spending some of that holy power with your Final Verdict before you are pressing this, as we really do not want to overcap on that holy power. Then after that, we have our Divine Toll, and this again going to be on 1-minute cooldown, and this is going to cast Judgment at up to 5 targets. And these are actually stronger Divine Tolls as well, so they're going to do 100% increased damage. And we want to use these cooldowns right early in our window because we have our Final Reckoning that is up on the target for 12 seconds, and we want to get that increased holy power, that holy damage out of them. So that 15% increased damage from our holy power ability. Then from here, we're kind of going into that generating and spending sort of phase. So we're using Final Verdict at 3 to 4 holy power. We're using our Judgment, our Blade of Justice, as well as our Hammer of Wrath to generate that holy power. One thing I do want to mention here is with Hammer of Wrath, we do have something called Blessing of Anche. So you can completely ignore this with our specific talent build. That's going to be a talent that's through Herald of the Sun and is not in the Templar tree. So you can pretty much ignore that. So this is one of the things that's really nice about playing Ret Paladin is you go through your sort of general opener. There is a kind of a specific order for that. There's a couple little things you have to kind of manage like Expurgation, but after that, you're just kind of in this sort of building and spending phase. It's very straightforward. And there's not much that changes between single target and AoE. It's pretty much the same sort of opener. The only thing that changes is you're not really tracking Expurgation anymore. And we're just swapping out Final Verdict here for our Divine Storm. So anyway that you see Final Verdict over here on the left, that's just now our Divine Storm. So going over the priority one more time, Divine Hammer, Final Reckoning as your two main cooldowns that you send. Divine Storm at 5 Holy Power, or if Empyrean Power is active, I should probably put that in the parentheses here. Wake of Ashes into our Divine Toll, and then again, just generators and spenders. All right, going into our consumables here, pretty straightforward. Flask of Alchemical Chaos, that's pretty much what everybody's running right now. The secondary stats that you get from it are just too strong, too much throughput from it. No reason to run anything else. We also have Tempered Potion, which I would highly recommend to macro into something like your Divine Hammer, your Final Reckoning. Next, we have our consumables, so nothing too crazy here. This is pretty much what everybody else is running. So Flask of Alchemical Chaos, that's going to give us that burst of a random secondary stat. Pretty much works for every single spec in the game, right? Because it's a random secondary stat. So at some point, you're going to get, the stat that you want. So it just works across the board really well. We're also running our Tempered Potion here. I would recommend to probably buy one of the cheaper Tempered Potions like the Tier 2 and macro that into like your Divine Hammer or Final Reckoning so that you can use it on your opener. Just be careful if you do that and you go to like dummies or something, you're going to be popping Tempered Potions on dummies, which can get very expensive very quickly. Pretty standard stuff here. Algari Healing Potion, the Mana Oil for that additional crit and haste. Augment Runes if you can afford them. You can go Sushi Special or just the typical Beladar's Bounty from the auction house. It's a cheaper version. This is going to be the diamond that we're running. This is going to give us primary stat and then critical effect per unique gem color. Again, pretty consistent across a lot of the DPS specs. And then we're going to be running Quick Onyx for our just general gem. Then taking a look at our enchants, looks like I have an issue here where I have the Cloak enchant on here twice and the Ring enchant on here twice, but you can kind of ignore that. Authority of the Depths is going to be our main weapon enchant. Everything else is going to be pretty standard. Winged Grace on the Cloak, on the chest, Crystalline Radiance from our primary stat, Avoidance on our bracers. Your leg armor kit is going to be the Stormbound armor kit. That's going to give us that main stat strength. It's also going to give us a little bit of stamina as well. We're going to be going Scout's March on our boots enchant. And then for our ring enchants, we're going for Radiant Haste and then Cursed Mastery on the other. Then taking a look at our embellishments, we're going to be the Dark Moon Sigil Ascension here, and we're going to be able to actually double this effect through the Writhing Armor Band. So just make sure you're not getting this banding without some sort of Nerubian effect, or it's just going to be essentially wasted. You got to have the Nerubian effect to get that double effect bonus. So these two kind of work in pair. And then as an alternative, you could run something like Dawn Thread Lining. That's going to give us a little bit of critical strike while we are above 80% health. Okay, now let's go ahead and go into our tier set. So our 2-piece and our 4-piece. So this is actually something that you're going to want to track, especially when you get down to the 4-piece bonus. So we'll just start from the top here. So basically your Final Verdict and your Divine Storm are going to stack something called a winning streak. You can stack up to 10 times by 2% per stack. One thing to note though is as you do cast this spell over and over, there is a chance that you can remove that winning streak. So it's kind of like a high risk, high reward sort of gamble system that you're doing here. At least I think that's what they were going for, but there's not much you're really gambling with here because to get the stacks, you have to spend your Holy Power Spenders, and then to lose the stacks, you have to spend your Holy Power Spenders. So you're not really tracking this in any sort of way. It's just going to happen sort of passively. But one thing that you do need to track, though, is going to be on the 4 set. So when you lose your winning streak, you get the last Holy Power spent back, and you cannot lose Holy Power for the next 4 seconds. So you have this 4-second window where let's just say you're at an AoE pack, and you can just spam Divine Storm over and over again. And then not only that, it's going to increase the damage of your Holy Power abilities by 10%. So one of the more interesting tier sets, I will say. So this is a window that you will want to track. Again, that 4 seconds is going to be very, very important because you can just spam Divine Storms over and over and do insane damage. You could also pair this window with like your wings or your other cooldowns. You just basically do infinity damage for like 4 seconds straight. So really cool tier set. Let's go into the general tips section. So kind of like we talked about a few times already on Holy Power, you need to make sure that you're not wasting it and overcapping it. We also have our debuffs that we want to keep up. So like our Expurgation, for example, that's something that you want to be tracking. And then we also have our cooldowns over here on the right-hand side. You want to make sure that those are lining up perfectly on every pull for maximum damage output. All right, then final section I want to talk about here is going to be our stat priority. So this is just sort of like a general. If you're not sure like what specific stats do, that's all this section's talking about here. And then the section right below it is the actual priority. So strength, then number 2 is going to be mastery, crit, and haste, and versatility. So one of the nice things about Holy Paladin is essentially all of your damage is holy damage. So that's why mastery is so strong for us. It's not like a mix of damage that you're doing. It is the vast majority that you're doing is going to be holy damage. If you're not sure what our mastery is, it's High Lord's Judgment, increases the holy damage done by 11%. And then your Judgment also has a chance to blast the target with light, dealing a big burst of damage. Up next, we have Critical Strike, which is going to be the next most important. So we're running things like Education. We also have Heart of the Crusader. So those 2 talents alone are pretty much going to carry the stat priority of Critical Strike. It just works really well with our tree and the talents that we're running. So this is going to be the next highest throughput secondary stat. And then our final 2 secondary stats are going to be Haste, followed by Versatility. Versatility is going to be really good in high keys for survivability. And it really just comes down to raw numbers, to be honest with you. Mastery, we get the most value from Mastery, followed by Critical Strike, then Haste. That's as simple as I can make it. You're going to see something like Haste be more beneficial on specs that are very proc-based, and Rep Paladin isn't as proc-based as a lot of other specs in this game. It's more off those big burst damage windows. So yeah, anyways, that's going to be the end of this guide. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.